Okay. So 2019 A-levels, question number 1. This is the same thing, Lamai. Mention 4 major functions of the government in a mixed economy. The ones that we discussed. What are the major functions? Number 1 is to ensure efficient. I'm not writing the whole thing. I'll just say this, guys. We did this before. One major function is to ensure efficient allocation of resources. Second one is to minimize income disparities. Third one, ensure macroeconomic stability. And then you can say promoting economic growth and development. Those are the 4 major functions of the government in a mixed economy. So when the moment the government intervenes to a market economy, it becomes a mixed economy. Simple thing. Okay. We've discussed that before. Okay. Look at this, Laman. What are the obstacles to achieve? Yes, 4 marks. Just mention. Okay. What are the obstacles to achieve an efficient allocation of resources in a market economy? Simple. Remember, one reason for market failure is inefficiency in resource allocation. Tell me the sub reasons under that. That is what they're asking. Obstacle. So obstacles to achieve efficient allocation of resources in a market economy. Number 1, the private sector does not provide what? Private sector does not provide public goods. Now, they don't provide public goods. So you can say non-provision of public goods by the private sector. You can talk about over-provision of demerit goods. Over-provision, demerit. Under-provision, right? Under-provision of merit goods. All of this we spoke about at the very beginning. I think 2011 paper or something. Okay. You can talk about non-optimal consumption of quasi-public, right? I guess I'm just writing short forms. You can talk about externalities, right? Negligence of externalities. They don't care about external cost or benefit. No, they only look at their private cost and benefit. So as a result, they end up over consuming or under consuming. Why should there be optimal consumption? So optimal consumption means the proper desired level of consumption. So quasi-public goods are under consumed. It could have been consumed more, but it's under consumed. Now things like highways, remember I explained that you are charging a price much higher than your marginal cost. Now, if you want to go in a highway, they are saying 500 rupee entry ticket. But the cost of you going, the marginal cost of you going in that highway is almost zero. So even if you are willing to pay 300 and go, they won't send you. They will say, no, 500 don't. So as a result, what happens? Even people who are willing to pay a little less doesn't get the chance of consuming it. So therefore, it becomes under-consumed. Just because someone pays 300 and go in the highway, government won't lose now. But they won't let you go. That's why there is non-optimal consumption. Consumption happens at a lesser level. Yes, you can talk about pollution. So all of that can come under externalities. Okay. You can talk about creation of monopolies. You can talk about that imperfect competition. Monopolies, or you can say imperfect competition. Is that okay, Lamai? Tragedy of commons are common resources, where common resources get exploited. Okay, that very simple. Then number 3, define pure public, right? I'm skipping. Merit goods, I'm hoping you all know. Missing markets is a market that is not served by the private sector. For example, you can say like public goods, there is a missing market. For let's say street light, there won't be a market in the private sector because they won't provide. That's what we call missing market. Okay. Merit goods, what are merit goods, guys? Goods that generate positive externalities in consumption, where the social benefit exceeds the private benefit. You can also talk about the rivalry and excludability, no problem there. Okay. Then you have common resources and this, give me a second. Okay, right? So what are common resources, Lamai? Common resources are the ones you can give the, remember, 4 marks means 1 mark per definition, no? So pure public, non-rival, non-excludable. You write that for 2-3 lines, you get your mark. Merit goods, goods that generate positive externalities in consumption, where the social benefit is more than the private benefit, you get your 1 mark. Common resources are the resources where what happens? where they are rival but none excludable. If you want, give a small example also. And then finally, what are natural monopolies, Lamai? We learned this in unit number 4. Natural monopolies. What is this? This is from nowhere the examiner has put for some reason. Do you know why? We don't really talk about natural monopolies in unit number 8 much. What is a natural monopoly? A natural monopoly, Lamai, is a monopoly firm, right? Is a firm that is big, right? A firm that is big, and they are experiencing monada. They are experiencing economies of scale. They are so big, they are experiencing economies of scale. So their cost is very low. So as a result, new people can't even come and compete with them because they are huge, guys. Now, remember the example I gave in class? Let's say I am the only econ teacher in Sri Lanka. I am teaching, let's say, 100,000 econ students. So then my tube printing cost, everything per unit cost will be very low. So then I can even charge a class fees of 1,000 rupees and do the class. Then if a new teacher comes, he can't even think of charging 1,000 rupee class fees because why? His dude printing cost for his website, maybe cost for his let's say admin, that itself will be more than 1,000 per student. That's what you call natural monopoly. So naturally I become a monopoly because no one else can come and complete. So natural monopoly means Lamai, there is no artificial barrier. So there is no patent, government is not restricting the entry. There is no artificial barrier like that. Naturally itself, you're a big firm, you're so big, you are experiencing economies of scale, so your cost is very low, others can't come and compete. That's what you call a natural monopoly. Difference between natural and normal, so there's nothing like that. A monopoly is a firm where there is only one firm in the industry. So a natural monopoly is where there is one firm in the industry because they are so big, they are experiencing economies of scale, no one else can enter. Is that fine? Natural monopolies. Okay. Now, so 1 mark, 1 mark, 1 mark. Okay. No big explanation. Just like that. Then question number 4. Hayo. Explain why are taxes needed for a country and briefly outline the properties. Okay. There are 2 parts in the question. Why are taxes needed for the country? Remember my objectives of taxation we did in a previous paper. Can someone give me the paper number also? So taxes are needed. 1, to collect government revenue, to fund the expenses. You need taxes for that. You need taxes to minimize income disparities. You need taxes to ensure efficient allocation of resources. If there are goods with demerit goods, you put a tax and you reduce it. Now you can ensure efficient allocation of resources. Then to control aggregate demand and supply. So now Lamai, you can't write points here, you have to give a small explanation. So for example, you can say let's say, okay, for example, minimize income disparities, 2016 7.3. Okay, we discussed this here. 7 subsection 3, you can refer back if someone is jumping into the 2019 paper on YouTube. So now since they are saying explain Lama, you can't give points. Okay, so you have to write a small explanation. So you can give around 4 reasons. 4 reasons also too much, but never mind, we'll give 4 below. So you can say one reason why taxes are necessary is to fund the expenditure of the government. So government would charge taxes from the consumers, producers, and all the parties, and would use that money for government recurrent and capital expenditure. You can give something like that. Then you can say another reason that taxes are necessary is to minimize the income disparities. For this purpose, the government could charge, let's say, progressive taxes, tax the rich with a higher percentage, and use that income to, let's say, provide transfers or subsidies to the poor. So likewise, Lamai, in your words, there is no, you don't have to write what is in the textbook or what I am saying. In your words, give like a two 2 or 3 line explanation for each of these points. Then you'll get your full marks. Now see, that is not completely enough. They're also saying, Lamai, briefly outline the properties of a good tax. What are the properties of a good tax? Why are they asking this? No? That, no? What are they? What are the properties of a good tax? Making sure there is equity. Right? Equity, remember we talked about vertical and horizontal equity. Then making sure there is convenience. Convenience. It's economical. Okay. Then making sure there is what? Neutral. Neutral. Flexibility. Certainty. Right? So all of this, now you can't just write the thing, a simplicity. You have to write around 1 or 2 lines small explanation, because they are saying outline. So they are not saying state the desirable properties. So when they say equity, you can say equity is ensuring that the tax system is fair. So under you can say there are 2 types of equity. One is vertical and then there is horizontal equity. Enough. Because you're getting around only 2 marks for this. No? So maximum they can give you is half a mark for each of this. So mention small 1-2 line explanation. Mention small 1-2 line explanation. Remember guys, when you all are doing papers, now you all must be doing papers now with whoever you all are doing. Read the question very carefully, right? The question verb. So when they say explain, you have to explain. When they say outline, you have to write a small line. It's a little bit more than state. So if they have just said state, you can just say equity this thing. Be very careful with how they have worded. Okay, that's question. Justify, that depends on the question. So if they say justify, it can be a big answer as well. Then number 5. See, in this paper, Lamai, all the questions were easy. Only the 5th one was a little hard. You see, question, now just look at the questions. Easy, functions of the government. Question 1. Question 2, obstacles to achieve efficient allocation of resources. 4 marks. Question 3, define these things. 4 marks. Question 4, why are taxes needed and this thing. So those 16 marks were already questions that were already there in past papers. Very direct. The only new thing that they came up with was this. So in this also, this part is directly there in your theory. The second one was the new one. So what is meant by the primary balance? What is the primary balance of the government, Lamai? The primary balance is monad. That is the overall balance excluding interest payments. Or you can say, you can write the long formula. You can say this is the difference between the total government revenue including grants and the total government expenditure excluding interest payment. So if you say difference between, that means this minus this. You can give in a definition like that. That is what is primary account balance. I'm hoping you all know. Now, Lamai, why is it important? Now, even the IMF is telling more than overall balance, they are focusing on our primary account balance. Why? Can you all give me some reason? Why is this primary account balance, or why is it important to have a surplus in our primary account balance? Think and tell me. Why? Yes, overall balance includes interest payment. Why is it important to have a primary account surplus? Yes, one thing is, you're having a primary account surplus means with your revenue, you can cover all your expenditure. That now interest payment, Lamai, interest payment is for loans that you took before. No? You have taken some loans before in previous years. Because of that, you have to pay some interest now. So interest is not, now let's say currently a new president comes. That is not his fault. No. The fact that you have to pay interest. Now let's say, for example, let's say I become president next year. I go for the election and I become president. But still, I can't reduce my expenditure and revenue much, because if you take my expenditure, interest payment is not my fault. No. Even if I become president, because Mahinda was president, Gota was president, Maitri was president, Santrika was president, because of all of those past fellows took loans, now I have to pay interest. So if the public comes and blames me and say, look here, sir, you said you know econ and you became president, but you also have a budget deficit. What is the point of it? You can't blame me there because interest payment is not my thing. So that's why we calculate the budget balance without interest payment to see at least that year have you been doing good. Now in Sri Lanka Lamai Maitri, right, in 2017 and 2018, we actually had primary account surpluses. Primary account, we had a surplus. Even last quarter, if I'm not mistaken, 2020, no, first quarter, we had a small surplus. So 2017, 2018, we had overall for the entire year, we had primary account surpluses. That means Maitri has been, forget about interest payment. Now, you can't blame Maithripala for the interest that previous president, let's say Mahinda and Chandrika and them took. No. So during his year, the revenue was enough to cover all the expenditure, excluding interest payment. So that is why it's important, Lamai. So you having a primary surplus means you're having enough money to cover monada. You have enough money to cover your expenditure, right? Cover that year's expenditure, that is recurrent capital both. Cover that year's expenditure without interest payment. So if there was no interest payment, that year's expenditure you can cover. Now just think, Lamai, if you have a primary account deficit, that is like a debt trap. Why? Having a primary account deficit means you can't cover your interest also. To pay your interest, you will have to borrow. Just think, having a primary account deficit means you don't even have money to cover your expenditure. So some of your interest payments also is gone. So you don't even have money to cover your normal expenditure. So even to settle your interest, you might have to, let's say, borrow and pay. That kind of a thing is there. So as long as now even IMF is saying, Lamai, they are not very concerned about overall. Even what they are saying is primary. Make sure by there is a target, if I'm not mistaken, 2.5% of a primary account surplus by 2025. 2.5 or 2.4, can't remember the exact number, to have a primary account surplus. They are not saying overall surplus because they also know interest payment, Ranil can't do anything. No. The current budget or next year's budget can't reduce the interest payment. So primary account surplus is what's the main thing that they are concerned about. So one reason why it's important, if you have a primary account surplus, that means you're covering all the expenditure during that year, excluding interest payment. Overall balance past interest payment equals primary account. Yes. Overall balance including interest payment. No. So overall balance excluding the interest payment is what you call the primary account balance case. In the overall balance, go back to your theory tooth and see. In the overall balance, you take all the revenue minus all the expenditure. Primary account balance, you take all the revenue, but minus all the expenditure without interest. The only difference between overall and primary account balance is interest payment. Yeah. So if you're calculating the overall balance without interest payment, that means you're calculating the primary account balance. So for the overall balance, if you add back interest payment, now to calculate the overall balance, you're minusing interest payment. So for overall balance, if you add back interest payment, you then get the primary account balance. Okay? Go back and check. So what else can we write, guys? Why else is this important? Think and tell until I have some water. Why else is having a primary? Now, one reason is if you have a primary account balance, that means you can cover all the expenditure for that year without borrowing. You don't have to borrow to cover your expenditure. It's the interest payment that you might not be able to sometimes cover. Why? Will IMF pay interest if you have made a listing? Why will the IMF pay interest? Because IMF is not going to give us anything just because we have a primary account surplus. They are that's our interest to pay, but they have given targets to cover the interest. They will not come and pay our interest to anything. Anything else, Lam? Why is this having a primary account surplus? So you can say this is a good indicator. Having a primary account surplus, Lama, can also help with our debt to GDP. This doesn't mean it will definitely reduce the debt, but having a primary account surplus, Lamai, yes, the debt dynamics. Okay, so you can say debt dynamics. Other words, that's what you call your debt to GDP ratios. Okay, so your debt to GDP. Having a primary account surplus කියන්නේ ළමයි, you don't have to borrow to cover your expenditure. No? It's the interest that you might not be able to cover, but to cover your day-to-day expenditure, your recurrent capital, you have enough money. So having a primary account surplus means it will not contribute a lot to your debt. So you don't have to borrow a lot now because you're covering your expenditure, no? With your revenue. If you have a primary account surplus, you're covering your expense, no problem. So therefore, what can happen, Lamai? I'm not saying that this will definitely reduce it, but this can be favorable for your debt dynamics. So it can help with reducing your debt to GDP ratio. Not that it will definitely reduce your debt to GDP, but it will help in reducing your debt to GDP. So those kind of things you all can write, Lama. You can say you can cover all your expenditure. It will help with the debt dynamics. It will help reduce your debt to GDP. It says that having a primary surplus means it's saying that there is fiscal discipline. And there is fiscal discipline. So, for example, during let's say Maitri's year, you can say there was fiscal discipline. He was able to have fiscal discipline and get things done. He was able to earn revenue enough to cover the expenditure. So that kind of answer you all can give, Lama. Is that okay? Fine. Safe now. So go through and come up with a nice answer. This one is the only hard question. All the other questions are very easy. Okay.